momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, faith fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. This is a special show today. It is like a Femme Friday, but it's not on Friday. I'm very excited because we have an amazing show. We're going to be talking about women in labor and a personal account of organizing as a woman in a right-to-work state. We're going to be talking first today with Daisy Pitkin, who is the author of On the Line, A Story of Class Solidarity and Two Women's Epic Fight to Build a Union. And then later, we're going to have Alexandra Brodsky on to discuss sexual justice, supporting victims, ensuring due process, and resisting the conservative backlash. I think a lot of us are paying attention right now to the conservative backlash that's happening all over the country. I'm just going to lead with, and I'm going to continue on this all week, that there is no part of the country that's off the table. Whether you're in a deep red district, you're in Alabama, or you're in a right-to-work state like Arizona, or you're in a state like California or New York, they are investing everywhere. If they're not, even if you're in a safe blue district, they're coming after you to make a point, to push their agenda forward, not because they necessarily think they're going to win there, but they know that every single place they push their message out, it spreads like a wildfire. It's a fascinating strategy that I wish maybe the Democrats would take, but oftentimes they'll fall for these things and surrender. We'll talk more about that later. But first, I want to welcome our first guest, Daisy Pitkin. Daisy she's the author of this new book. I'll show you. Came out this spring called On the Line, A Story of Class Solidarity and Two Women's Epic Fight to Build a Union. Daisy's an organizer. This is like a personal tale. Kind of reminds me of Nickel and Dimed, Barbara Ehrenreich's famous story that came out. At this point, I think I read in college, so over 20 years ago. But she actually, she took on a role to understand the working conditions. It wasn't necessarily that she was part of, that when she took on the role of housekeeper. It was really something that she tried to make a point of as an author. This is your personal story and your colleague's personal story. So first off, thanks for joining us, Daisy.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
So this is about a campaign. It's a pretty long campaign. I mean, I think a lot of folks are now seeing the successes of campaigns against major companies, monopolies like Amazon and Starbucks, which the campaign from start to finish has not really been that long. There have been some failures here and there and successes, and people have been inspired to do the same. But, yours was it didn't get that national attention. It was maybe even a little bit earlier than these big, bold campaigns, which is great. But 5 years, how did this all start?
Yeah, so you're exactly right that I think there are two things at play. One, that this happened in the early 2000s, which was not a time when we were seeing the kind of groundswell that I think has just begun now. That's really, we're kind of on the cusp of a new wave of worker-driven organizing all across the country, sector after sector, region after region of the country. But in the early 2000s, that was not the case. And I was a new union organizer working on a campaign among industrial laundry workers in Phoenix, Arizona. So it was before this sort of wave that is kind of revitalizing the labor movement. And also it was among a group of workers, industrial laundry workers, that I think most people don't know exist. We don't know that industrial laundries exist in every city and large community across the country. People don't know what goes on there. So I wanted to write On the Line to tell the story of industrial laundries and what goes on inside of them, how they're connected to the everyday lives of people who go to restaurants and hotels and hospitals. And then also tell a story about what it really takes to organize a union in this country under broken labor law. And it took these workers 5 years to organize the majority of the industrial laundry industry in Phoenix, through vicious anti-union attacks and many, many sort of waves and steps of the organizing process. So I hope the book kind of details for folks what it looks like behind the headlines to actually build a union right now in this country.
Let's set the stage. So Phoenix, Arizona is a right to work state. Was it back then?
It was back then. And back then it was, Phoenix was a deep red city in a deep red state in Joe Arpaio country. The majority of industrial laundry workers at that time were immigrants, mostly from Mexico and Central America. And the community there was in some ways, built to be hostile to this group of workers. There were compounded vulnerabilities that they were facing. And despite that, they decided they were going to stand up with each other and fight to unionize. It was really inspiring.
So how did you get involved in this from the start?
As an undergraduate student, I became really involved in the anti-sweatshop movements of the late 90s. So really became aware of the conditions under which particularly college apparel was made, and started understanding organizing and power in new kinds of ways. And then when I was a senior in college, I went to school in the Twin Cities. And there were some workers at a Holiday Inn Express that won a union election just kind of around the corner from the campus where I was going to school. And after they won their election, the company called the INS and arrested 7 of the housekeepers who were union activists. And the community really rose up in response to that. There were candlelight vigils and marches and rallies, and I became really involved in that fight. And it changed me. Seeing the kind of directness of a community's response to anti-union and really racist and anti-worker behavior like that was powerful, and I wanted to be a part of it. So not long after that, I started working for this small, scrappy organizing union, Unite, and they got the crazy idea to try to send a group of organizers to Phoenix, Arizona to see if we could organize industrial laundries. And we did, but mostly because the workers there, led by some really strong worker leaders, just decided that no matter what these companies threw at them, they were going to fight.
So this is a 5-year fight. Why did it last 5 years? Can you kind of like did you go through successes and losses and keep going, or?
Yeah, there were many steps to the campaign, and they almost, every step of the way there was sort of a success couched inside of a failure, because for 2 reasons. One, because the companies that own these industrial laundries are virulently anti-union, aggressively anti-union, and also because labor law in this country is really broken. There are loopholes in them the size of buses, and there are anti-union law firms that these companies hire for millions of dollars that help drive the companies right through those loopholes. So, each step of the way, workers would have a major success, like a strong majority of them signing union cards and filing for a union election. And the next day, the company would bring in anti-union consultants and start holding captive audience meetings and threatening people and surveilling people and firing people and disciplining people. And support for the union would erode. And then the workers would file charges against the company for violating their laws or violating their rights. And then there would be a long court process. There was a very long court process. The workers won, and then the company would use their legal backing to appeal for years and years. So, the company really, and companies all across the country still today, Starbucks, Amazon, all of the companies that are fighting unionization in this moment, they use time as a weapon. They use time to try to quash momentum. And it works sometimes. And sometimes when you have really strong leadership and workers are able to build a community inside their fight, right? Like a community inside their movement of resistance, then they can withstand it. Then they can withstand the sort of the anti-union tactics and the time that the company is able to buy through the system.
That's crazy. So some of these tactics, I imagine they were effective, and over a 5-year process, many workers may have left, and you probably had to restart, recruiting people. How did you keep that going?
Turnover is a big part of the sort of time equation that I was just talking about, right? Like companies, people don't last forever in these jobs, especially in industrial laundries. They're dangerous, hot places to work. The work is very physically demanding and difficult. So there is a lot of turnover. And then, in the middle of a union campaign, the company is in charge of who gets to come to work inside the brand. So the turnover itself gives the company a massive advantage. But then new workers come in. Mostly they're really terrified of the union campaign. They know about it before they start. They've probably heard some anti-union messaging before their first day on the factory floor, and it takes a long time for the union committee to begin to have organizing conversations with those folks that are effective enough to move them toward the union. But if you have a community of workers that are committed to that, it's possible, as my book sort of delineates.
So what do you think was what made that possible? What's sort of the secret to success, without giving away the goods, because who knows who's watching?
I think so. The short answer is solidarity, right? The short answer really is workers trusting each tor enough to stand with each other through thick and thin, through whatever the company throws at them, and knowing that, sort of being inoculated enough against the company's message that whatever they hear from the company, they know to take with a grain of salt until they can circle up with their community of workers who are fighting to build a union and talk about what's going on and why is the company saying this now or doing this now. Solidarity, I think that's the short answer. The bigger question inside of that is, what is solidarity and how do people build it? And I think that question is really at the heart of my book. That in some ways, as a new organizer, I was taught that solidarity was built through anger, through agitation, right? That workers are mad about things that happen and their place of work, and they should be, right? That there's a kind of righteous indignation that is a catalyst to the building of solidarity. And in my book, I try to complicate that notion a little bit. I think anger is really important on organizing campaigns, but what I've seen, especially among groups of workers who are mainly women, is there's another kind of emotional heart to a campaign. It's not all anger. It's hope, it's care, it's mutual aid. And that is really the sort of substance of solidarity. And once you have that, once workers are able to build a network based on that, they can withstand 5 years of anti-union campaigning and still win at the end of it, even though they shouldn't have to.
So in the final, period, how was there sort of a switch? Was there just a series of, they kept, going through legal proceedings, and then, and people just started to what really carried you to that win in those final moments?
Well, I don't want to give away the end of the book, but they won because It's a complicated win at the end of the book. I'll say it's a really complicated victory. And it was a difficult one in many ways for this group of workers in Phoenix. But what it ended up taking was a massive national campaign of pressure against this corporation, and getting the corporation to give in, not just in Phoenix, but in many, many places across the country. The workers on their own working for this French multinational billion-dollar corporation they would have won eventually, but the company would have continued to delay and delay and delay through court. It would have been a 10-year campaign if there hadn't been this sort of national campaign of pressure to make them come to the table.
Now, has it inspired other campaigns, whether, in other industries across the country? Has the model inspired others?
I think that at the root of the book, there's really a question about the role of staff organizers and the role of that kind of top-down campaigning that ended up winning that fight. And we're in a moment right now where we're seeing and hearing a lot of conversation about bottom-up organizing. Right. What does it mean to have these kind of organic, groundswell campaigns where workers are organizing themselves and each other? I think my book really speaks to that question, because the campaign in Phoenix was bottom up, but bottom up in one market alone was not enough to bring these massive corporations to their knees. I wonder if there's a way now, these bottom up campaigns that are not just market by market, but happening when workers network nationally and bring their own kind of labor power to bear on big corporations. If the question at the book is sort of being spoken to right now by organizing what's happening. Right?
It's something to really ponder because, of course, there's different, we've interviewed some folks who've been Starbucks organizers and, of course, Chris Smalls. And there's been a lot of questions like Starbucks, they're small little groups, so it's easier to organize and win, community by community, Starbucks location by Starbucks location, or say Amazon. And these are obviously the most the ones that people are paying attention right now. Chris Smalls chose not to go with an existing union and really keep it within their own control. And they lost, of course, and then they won again. I mean, it ended up winning. But I think there is like a real important conversation about what are the tactics that are winning and losing based on the industries, based on the circumstances, based on the politics, the city, the state. I mean, New York is a union town, so it's more in the narrative. You don't have to do that mindset switch in a way you may have to in other states. So there's a lot of really deep questions here. Are you still doing this?
Yeah, I'm a union organizer right now for Workers United, and I'm really lucky to be able to work on the Starbucks campaign in support of those workers who really are organizing themselves and each other. There are a handful of staff organizers like me, and my job now is really different from any other campaign that I've ever worked on. And I find it so inspiring every day. Like I didn't imagine that a union fight like this would happen in my lifetime. Wow. And I just feel so lucky to get to work on it. I'm so inspired. Every day.
Right now? You're doing Starbucks. So
I'm in Pittsburgh. Awesome. I live in Pittsburgh and I'm supporting some of the stores here, but I'm also, because there are so few staff organizers on the job, we're all really helping workers all over the country. So I'm also talking to workers in the Pacific Northwest and in Boston and in Florida and in Texas. And so it's a really interesting campaign because my role is more just facilitation, making sure they're connected with each other as much as they can be, so that as they experiment with tactics in one local area, when we learn that an experiment works, the question is, how do we scale that nationally? And we do that by making sure people are as networked as possible. And that's part of my job now. It's really fun.
It's really fascinating and such an exciting time to do this. Folks, go check out this amazing book called On the Line, A Story of Class Solidarity and Two Women's Epic Fight to Build a Union by Daisy Pitkin. It is in Workman Press, Workman Publishing, I believe is the proper term. Any book that Jane McAlevey endorses is a book that I love. Thank you so much, Daisy.
Thanks so much for your time.
Right,
yeah.
Good luck.
Bye.
All right, we will be right back with Alexandra Brodsky to talk about her new book, Sexual Justice. They keep surprising me. I put in an order with our dear friends at Sunset Lake CBD, and they sent me some new stuff as a little gift. I have talked about how I use Sunset Lake CBD for a lot of things, migraines, for sleeping. I love to take their melatonin drops with CBD. It's a perfect combination. It has 1,200 milligrams of CBD oil infused with 90 milligrams of melatonin. But they have new gummies that have both of those things in it. And of course, like, who doesn't want to eat the gummies? So, of course, that's what I do is I eat like 3 or 4 of them and I have a problem. Sunset Lake CBD is, of course, of course. I'm just going to keep saying, of course. Sunset Lake CBD is a farmer-owned company that ships craft CBD products directly from their Vermont farm to your door. They have all types of products. They have salves and gummies and tinctures and lotion and coffee and dog biscuits, all to help you with stress, aches, and pains. They took that farm, that Ben & Jerry's farm, which had great juju, no doubt, and they turned it into a sustainable farm that is, of course, enhancing their rural community and creating meaningful employment in that community with $15 minimum wage, as well as their own employees own the majority of the company. Top it off, they support shows like our show, The Majority Report, The David Pakman Show. I highly recommend it. My whole family's on it, although I found out many of them don't put the promo code in. So thanks, guys. Go check out sunsetlakecbd.com and you will get 20% off of your entire order. Sunsetlakecbd.com and you will get 20% off of your entire order when you type in Nomi, Nomi. It's up on the screen right now. While you're at it, guys, make sure to click like and subscribe. Make sure to follow us on all the different platforms. We got Twitch. We got YouTube. We've got Patreon, of course, for as low as $5 a month. You can be part of our Patreon community, which keeps this show going. And as always, go follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, too. We put some stuff up there. All right, guys, we'll be right back with Alexandra Brodsky. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Alexandra Brodsky is a civil rights attorney with Public Justice. She is the author of this new book out called Sexual Justice, Supporting Victims, Ensuring Due Process, and Resisting the Conservative Backlash. She's a graduate of Yale Law School and clerked for the U.S. Court of Appeals of the Ninth Circuit. And she has co-edited the Feminist Utopia Project and has written about sexual violence for the New York Times, The Guardian, and the Washington Post, and Atlantic, many other places. Alexandra, thank you for joining.
Thanks so much for having me
on this lovely Sunday morning. So this is a really bold thing to write about. Kind of the gray areas of post Me Too movement, I guess is probably one way of saying it. And that, we are encouraged on the left in particular, as feminists, as allies of women, to believe all women. But we also live in a world where conservatives like to play games with the left and maybe even weaponize some of our greater forms of solidarity against each other and against institutions. I think I definitely know some people who've experienced that, and we're not given maybe a due process. I'm sure, this is part of your book. So this is a really hard one. I really give you a lot of credit, and I think it does take a lawyer to kind of weave through these ideas. But what inspired you to write this? Let's just start off with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what inspired me to write it is some of the, the things that you're saying, that I felt like it was both true that we were making huge progress in terms of more support for survivors in the workplace, in schools, in our communities more broadly, particularly around Me Too. And then I heard a lot of questions about, what about the people accused of sexual harassment? What does it mean to be fair to them? And some of those questions I thought were good questions. Were coming from allies who are committed to survivor justice, but also care about due process, also care about making sure that workers aren't fired unjustly or students aren't suspended unjustly. But some of the questions were coming from the right, people who, let's be honest, don't really care about due process, don't care about the rights of criminal defendants, don't care about immigrants, don't care about student discipline or workers' rights in any other context. But all of a sudden, they're really concerned about due process in the context of sexual harassment allegations. So I wanted people on the left to feel confident that you don't have to pick a side. You can value both survivor justice and due process, that those commitments can be mutually reinforcing and end up helping everyone, because survivors need due process too. But I also want us to be equipped to recognize the bad faith concern trolling from people who are just trying to stop us in our tracks. Who are just trying to get us to say, you know what, it really is hard to be fair here. I guess it would be better for us to do nothing at all. I guess it would be better for us to just ignore allegations again.
How much of this is the media? I'm going to take a big picture first. How much of this is media sort of falling for these tactics and not necessarily doing their job of reporting the way that they used to teach reporters to do? I have many personal experiences in this situation. I'll throw an anecdote. I had, on a campaign I worked on, somebody beneath me was harassing me, and later, it's all public, later came back and tried to essentially attack me for saying no. And then when a reporter was reporting on how this person was retaliating against me, which was thrown out eventually, I shared documents and said, this is somebody who's been harassing me. Reporter never mentioned that. That's my personal anecdote, but I also know that I've seen it happen to countless other people where they'll pick up on a story and then it becomes a story of its own, and then somebody's life is ruined. Maybe they've earned that, they should have lost their job, or maybe they shouldn't have, or maybe it was years ago and it's being conflated with something that's much bigger. I mean, there's so much nuance to this, but how much of it comes down to, in the beginning, just reporters not really covering the full story in all angles?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I'm really sorry to hear about your experience there. I mean, I think so much of this is fueled by irresponsible media practices. So I will say up front, I've been really frustrated by a lot of reporting about Me Too that has sort of accepted the frame that either we can, believe survivors, either we can provide support and healing, or we can care about due process, and that those are irreconcilable interests. And I think that makes it a more interesting story in some way, but also a really hopeless one, because we don't want to have to choose. We shouldn't have to choose. But I've also seen, a lot of bad reporting on both sides, and I don't want to make a false equivalence, but I talk in the book a little bit about the quote unquote reporting that happened with the allegations against Aziz Ansari. And many people will remember this. It was published on this little known website, babe.net. And I actually think that there were some important questions raised by this woman's story of Ansari allegedly, pursuing her when it was clear that she wasn't interested. And I think that there were important questions there about what a lot of heterosexual sex looks like today, and a lot of inequalities baked in. But instead, it was reported in this really sloppy way that attracted a lot of backlash, that made a lot of people say, well, if this is what Me Too is about, I'm out. But then I've also seen around sexual harassment, and also, I guess, what I would call broader cancel culture reporting, where there will be reporting that says, look at this famous scientist who's been, he's such a smart guy, he's been removed from his lab unjustly based on a mere allegation. And if the reporter actually bothered to look into the facts, they would say, there was an investigation. Here was all of the evidence that was provided, but they just accept this guy's story that he's being railroaded, that he's the real victim here. And I see that happening again and again with, cancel culture reporting, with reporting about the ramifications of sexual harassment allegations. And I think it gives people this false impression that there's just this epidemic of false allegations, when we know that reports of sexual assault are no more likely to be false than reports of any other kind of crime. And yet we have these misogynistic myths that make us think that these kinds of allegations are uniquely suspect, that we need to be uniquely careful not to be too quick to believe them.
And in the law, there's sexual misconduct in the law. There's terms in when this comes to investigations, things that are not accepted in the workplace, but may be different from the law. And then, of course, media, which case by case, person by person, publication by publication scenario, even algorithm. So help us to find, how workplaces in general, I know this is a very general concept, but you talk about an investigation. There are plenty of workplaces that will do an investigation after they've let somebody go. But when an investigation takes place, what needs to be shown to prove that something actually did exist? What are the key markers?
Sure, this is a big question. So, and in some ways we're talking about the Wild West here, because of course, if someone goes to court to say that either they've been sexually assaulted, they've been the victim of a crime, or presses a civil claim, which uses a higher standard of evidence, there are proceedings before a judge, there's a trial. I think a lot of people have a sense of what that looks like. But also institutions like workplaces, schools, hospitals, community groups, political groups, my brother's sci-fi club, all have their own internal policies about what is acceptable in our community and what do we do if someone says that these rules have been broken and they've been hurt. And a lot of workplaces and schools in particular work in the shadow of the law, where they have civil rights obligations to their employees who experience sexual harassment, but the law doesn't tell them exactly how they have to handle each allegation every time. And, so there are some workplaces, I'll be honest with you, that have terrible investigations that are really just aimed at protecting the company's bottom line, making sure that they're not going to be liable, no one's going to sue them, this isn't going to get out. And so sometimes it ends up being biased against, or often it ends up being biased against survivors. Sometimes it ends up being biased against the accused, but always the bias is in favor of the company. But we've also seen workplaces, particularly unionized workplaces and some public workplaces, where workers have significant rights, both when they come forward with a complaint and also when they're accused of one, where they can have, the opportunity to have an advocate. Present evidence on their behalf, where they have the chance to present witnesses. And the real, the key there is just that they get their chance to tell their side of the story. And that's not going to look like a criminal trial. No one expects that, HR is going to, bring in a guy in a robe and impanel a jury. And that's okay. It doesn't have to. But you do want to make sure that a workplace or any other kind of private institution is respecting really the basics of everyone getting the chance to tell their side of the story, everyone getting the chance to make their case.
I mean, is that kind of the root of what's happening right now? Is there's very little good faith conversation around these experiences, which affects both sides. It affects accusers and it affects victims. Is that kind of the sense of like the root of how this is blown out of control?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is it is so hard to have these conversations and try to answer the hard questions when you really never know if you can trust the other person on the other side of the conversation. And this is something that I've experienced all the time when talking about fair procedures in schools or in workplaces, where there are some nitty-gritty policy questions which are kind of boring but really important, like, what is the right standard of evidence for an institution to use? What kind of hearing model should they use? And I really want to be able to get into the details there. I'm a lawyer. I like these details, and I think that they really matter for people's lives. But it's really hard sometimes to tell whether the person debating you is on board with your values, also thinks that rape is bad, or if at the end of the day, they're using these concerns about due process just as a way to make sure that no one ever is held accountable for what they've done. And I find in those situations that it's just difficult to ever feel like you're going to come to some kind of consensus because you actually don't have the same goal. They want, people who are trying to use these due process concerns just to make sure that feminists can't make progress, just to make sure that we return to, the old times of how we handled sexual harassment. They don't want us to find answers because it's the lack of answers that make people say, this whole project is too hard. I'm going to just throw up my hands and let survivors deal with these problems on their own, or just sort of, say that people can go to the cops and that's their only option. And I think that that's a huge shame. And I want the left to get better at identifying who are good faith interlocutors, who are the people who are raising concerns because they're invested in the same ultimate goal of equality and survivor justice, and who are the people who are basically trolling us and trying to disrupt our good debates.
So you mentioned unions, but are there models for how to do this right, or as close as possible of doing this right?
I mean, I think that unions are really key, and other forms of worker collectives, in part because the best model is going to vary based on your circumstances. It's going to vary based on the context, because if you've got a really big company that has a lot of resources and has a big HR department, they're going to be able to put together a pretty sophisticated model that might involve a hearing, that might involve providing free legal services to both sides of an allegation. But if you're talking about a 15-person political club, obviously you're not going to spend $100,000 a year on this, and you shouldn't. And I don't want people to think that that's the only fair thing. And so I think in those contexts, just having the opportunity for everyone ahead of time, before they're dealing with any particular allegations where they're going to have their own feelings about, the particular circumstances, to step back and say, how would we want to be treated if we were harassed? If we were if we were the hurt person, how would we want to be treated? And if we were accused, if we loved were accused, how would we want them to be treated? And I think that unions provide a great opportunity for that. But I've also seen other models, like DSA has been going through this multi-year process of first creating and then refining a harassment policy. And that includes sexual harassment and also harassment based on race and class and disability. And one thing that I've been really heartened by is that there have certainly been problems with how the DSA policy has been implemented, but rather than giving up, rather than saying this means that DSA shouldn't have a role in addressing harassment between members at all, the members have said, let's make it better. Here's what we've learned, what isn't working, and here's how we can do better in the future.
Okay, so my last question is, what do you say to men or folks who don't identify as women, or are not really concerned with the feminist movement, or doesn't come first to mind in terms of where to get involved? How do you convince them to read this?
I guess what I would say is that the book is really meant to be an invitation to people who are a little skeptical of Me Too, who say, yeah, I don't think sexual harassment is good, but haven't we gone too far? Hasn't the pendulum swung in the other direction? And I want to take those concerns, those questions seriously and provide a real answer to that. And so, it is written also to feminists who want to figure out how to talk to their sexist uncle at, the dinner table about these things and, how to bring.
How do you know me so well? I feel like you did your homework, man.
But, I think, it's good for feminists to feel confident that we can push back on those kind of counter arguments. But I also want to just speak directly to people who have those concerns and say, you're right to care about due process.
Yeah.
You're right to want to make sure that everyone is treated fairly. But we can do that while supporting survivors. And in fact, that's part of supporting survivors. So, welcome to our movement.
I love this. Can you please send a book? I don't know if they're going to read it. I don't know if they read, to be honest, or an audio tape or Cliff Notes to Joe Rogan and Elon Musk. Just thank you so much on behalf of the movement.
I'm on it.
Listen, they're calling the left mob is coming for me, so I'm becoming a fascist. That's how it works. Now. That's how we think. Too many women speaking up about not wanting to be groped by billionaires. So therefore, fascism.
Seems logical to me.
Unreal. This is a really, thank you for doing this. Oh my God. I can imagine it was not easy to do this, or fun maybe, but you're lawyers, so you're trained to work through very complicated, just issues that we face in society and how to break them down. So I really appreciate this.
Thank you. And I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Alexandra Brodsky, go check out Sexual Justice. It is out now. It is by Metropolitan Books. I recommend going to your local bookseller, online or locally, of course, to go check it out. Thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you for this very special TNS. As always, make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you on Wednesday for a jam-packed show. Stay in solidarity.
The Nomiki Show. Nomiki Show. We clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show.